Okay, let's talk about the Atari 2600, which originally wasn't called the Atari 2600. It was originally called the VCS. It's only called the 2600 now, so that's what we're going to call it. Because that makes it easily fit into a nice slot, so everyone knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. So there are several versions of this, but the two I'm going to focus on is if you're in the US, probably one of the most common versions you'll find is the sort of wood panelled ones. You know, you've seen it, the ones that are the Atari. It seems to be these are just going by what you can find online. Ataris from the US tend to be the wood panel ones, and Ataris from the UK tend to be what most people now call the Atari Junior. That'll be the four slidey switches, the smaller Atari 2600. And in my personal opinion, I would agree with that, because when I have seen them at computer sales, boot fairs, that kind of thing, it's always the little black Atari Junior is the model that I see. Now, I'm pretty sure, and somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure there's no region coding. So, I could buy an Atari Junior in the UK and import stuff from the US with absolutely no problem, because as far as I'm aware, the frame rate, I mean, because there's always a frame rate issue with the older consoles. Some are, the US is 60 Hz NTSC, the UK is 50 Hz PAL, and that's about how the image displays on an older television. But I'm sure that on an Atari, on the 2600, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, and if you're going to buy one, research this yourself. There's surprisingly little information that I can confirm on this, amazingly so for such a popular console, that is locked in to the console, not to the games. So I could conceivably import, I don't know what I would, but I could conceivably import an Asteroids or Joust or something like that from the US and play it in my UK console with no problem. But again, if you are collecting for the 2600, you would be absolutely stupid, and I do mean stupid, to buy games online. And I tell you why, because you can still, and I could probably do this next week if I fancied doing it, you can still go to any boot fair in the country and somebody will be there with an Atari. It may just be a console and a joystick and a few games, maybe the power supply is missing, blah 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 blah, but you can still see these things, and they're just in a box of junk that people want rid of. For some reason, people don't keep these things, and they did sell. So pretty much every family in a cupboard somewhere, or in the loft, or in the garage, has an Atari. And you can quite often, you can still find these things with massive amounts of games for no money. And if you go wherever you live in any country, you can probably go on Craigslist or any local selling site and find these things still popping up with loads of stuff for very little money. Now, there are several things that you need to be wary of. Is the first things that go on Ataris is always the power supply. And they're very difficult to get. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure there are third-party companies making them, but when I did this video, I couldn't find any that... I think I found one on Amazon, that was from Hong Kong, and yeah, I don't generally buy power supplies for anything from Hong Kong. Not as a power supply, they tend to be really cheap and tinny, and you know, they heat up really badly. It's not really the sort of thing I want, especially with the sort of voltage that's going through these things. So might be best to be avoided, I don't know. But if you can find one of these in a working condition, yeah, by all means pick it up. Generally, for me, I won't, and I'll for two reasons. Now, Atari, for me, are, now I'm going to choose my words carefully, Atari after 1980 are quite possibly one of the worst companies that have ever existed. And I mean from a business point of view. They are honestly, quite possibly, definitely the worst company that's ever existed in gaming. If you take Atari from 1980 till now, and I could do an entire video on that, but I won't, because I'm talking about the 2600 here. I'm going to make that focus on the games. So, generally speaking, when it comes to games and when it comes to systems, all the cost-cutting measures at Atari came in around 1980. So, after 1980, the consoles were built cheaper, with cheaper parts, and this is why things quite often go wrong in them. As stuff was just generally cheaper. The programmers were cheaper, and in fact, they'd started sacking a lot of their programmers by this point in time. And this shows in the games. So, if you are game collecting for an Atari, for the 2600, the stuff to buy is stuff, the very latest stuff you want in your collection, generally speaking, is going to be 1980. 77 to 1980, that's when you want, and all the, you know, a lot of the games will have dates on them, they have copyright stickers on them, things like that. Sticks to stuff between 77 and 80. Because that's generally when the games were actually finished and when they were reasonably good games. Stuff that came out from 1980 onwards on the 2600, honestly, the vast majority of it is complete and utter shite. Don't even waste your time. Now that's just my opinion. But actually go and play these games, and go and play the ones that came out the early years of the console, go and play the ones that came out the later years of the console, and I think if you take an objective look on it, you might actually agree with me, surprisingly. Now, I know that might get me loads and loads of hate mail in the comments, but I imagine quite a lot of that is going to be, you know, people that have 2600s and a lot of people that have them. There is like a mad following for Atari. I think I mentioned it in one of my pickups videos. There are people out there that are just Atari superfans. They're like Atari ISIS, and they won't have a bad word said against them. But I'll say from a game collection, from stuff that is actually fun to play. I mean, you can go out and you can buy hundreds of Atari games for very little money, but if they're all 1980, 1981, 1982 games, they're all going to be shit, and that's why they're such little money, because nobody wants them. They're awful, they're badly done, they're unfinished. In a lot of cases, they're actually broken. You won't even be able to get to the end of some games. Basically down to Atari's penny pinching. Some third party stuff's okay, but again, that was quite a lot of it isn't, and you'll find as well, collecting for this is when lots and lots of third party stuff turned up. And in fact, there was a massive crash in 1983 in the States. It didn't really affect the rest of the world quite so badly, but there was a massive video game crash in 1983. I would say the majority of that crash was due to Atari, was due to their bad games, was due to their terrible business practices. And again, I could go on about how terrible 1980s Atari was I could go on for probably about 3 hours. But actually collecting for this system, yeah, if you are going to buy the console, find one working, and you have an old telly to play it on, and the set of games you get with it are all early release titles, and you're not spending too much money, then yes. But to have all that, you're probably talking maybe less than 5% of you. For the other 95%, I would say absolutely 100% avoid buying the actual console and avoid buying the games, because you're not, if they're late release titles, you're not going to enjoy them. They're all terrible, they're buggy, they're just, not all, but the vast majority of them. And emulate where possible. If you really want to try it, I would say, if you think you want to get into 2600 collecting, emulate first and see what you actually like, because you might be surprised. I know if you've ever heard somebody talk about Atari and they're an Atari fan, they always have this sort of fondness for this console. Objectively, it's actually, the vast majority of stuff is not that good, and do play it first before you think you might want to collect it, is all I'll say. So again, I'm not going to say avoid, because the early stuff is brilliant. There is nothing that could touch Atari really in the late 70s. That was the absolute peak of this company, was 77, 78. There's nothing that could even come close to beating them in the marketplace, in the arcade, and all the stuff is there. So yeah, emulate it, play the games, know the history of them, and then never ever buy one if you can avoid it. But if you have all the gear set up that you could just plug the console in and start playing, and you can get early release games, then do. And if you turn up at a boot sale or something like that and you can find a lot of the stuff, then yeah, fair enough. Generally speaking, if you're going to start collecting, if you're thinking about starting a game collection now, I would definitely not start with this console. Even though it has a lot of nostalgic love placed upon it by other people, as something to collect, leave it alone. But do emulate it so that you know what's going on. I think that's going to be my final verdict on this, is emulate. And again, as I've reached that final verdict, I know that every single Atari 2600 fan that sees this video is going to take this as some sort of personal slight on them. It's not meant that way. This is me trying to take a bit of an objective view on the console. Bearing in mind, I'm also trying to make it easier for the people to get into collecting. This is me taking an objective view, and I think anyone that's going to be upset by this video, it's not there to deliberately upset you. But if you feel that I've made any mistakes, then that comment section is for you. But please do keep it clean, keep it on topic. You know, I don't need anyone insinuating things about what my mother's preferences are like, or what my sexual preferences are like, based on the fact that I don't like Atari. I've seen you trolls on other people's comments, and I know exactly what you're like. Yeah, this is an objective view, and it's my objective view. If you have a different view, then that's entirely up to you. But I don't need the self-righteous ire of 2600 man all over my comments. By all means, if I've got something absolutely categorically wrong, then do put that in the comments. But yeah, so that is probably going to be the last one of what I'd call the second generation of consoles. I know technically, no, there are people that, in the last video I did was Commodore 64, which people can never seem to decide whether that's a first or second whether that's a second or third generation console. I'm going to call it a second generation, simply because of the time that it was first released. People argue it's an 8-bit system, it should be in the same generation as the NES, blah de blah de blah. Well, I'm sorry, I see it as a second generation console, and that's it. So that's why I did that as part of the second generation. I'm going to move on to the third generation with the next series of videos. So that will be the Master System, the NES, the what else am I thinking of? There's a few of them. I haven't got the bit of paper that I've started writing that down on. That's not in the book yet. That's still in first draft. Anyway, so we'll move on to that in the next series of videos. And if you like these, and if they've helped you in any way, then please do let me know. If you just want to call me lots of names, then that's what Twitter's for. That's not really for the comments on YouTube, although a lot of people seem to think it is. Yeah, I look forward to hearing anyone's opinion, as long as it's clean and reasonable. And I'll hopefully see you all in the next video, where hopefully I'm not going to be upsetting too many people. See you next time.